welcome to Volume 3 of the Tired Formula One pod. We're on a roll, Omar. We've got 3 episodes.
We
How are
really
you doing?
are. I'm doing well. How are you doing?
Yeah, tired. It's pretty early in the morning here in Melbourne, but I've got a cheeky bit of product placement.
There
So
you go.
yeah, I'm good.
There you go. Looking forward
How's
to
you?
Red. I'm looking forward to Red Bull adding us to their list of sponsors here soon, as well, or maybe the other way around. Let's whatever works, right?
I think we'd only make it on as an initial. They wouldn't be allowed to say the whole name.
Oh yeah. Hope you're enjoying that RB. It is not too late in the morning here. It's actually close to afternoon.
No.
But it's been a heck of a week with a lot of different breaking news and reactions, right? So we have a couple of things to get to today. As always, we're going to have the most tired take that anyone can have because that's who we are. But I want to kick things off today by sort of looking at, what 2024 means and just in general what competitiveness means, right? We have talked previously about fast cars and really is anyone going to beat the RB20 this year, right? But while we look at the car, we look at the drivers, and certainly there's lots to reflect on there. I think it's probably worth talking about what team structure means, and is any one of Red Bull's three, four rivals, if you want to call them,
Yeah.
those within sort of striking distance, if you will, of being able to give them a run at it this year. Are they set up right from a structure standpoint, from a lead designer standpoint, a lead architect of the car standpoint to be able to really give them a challenge? And I think it's sort of worth looking at what Adrian Newey has done there. I think a couple months ago, I read about how he almost went to Ferrari at some point last year, and that never happened. My misery continues, but he's
Ah.
still there, and well, I have to admit, maybe that wouldn't have helped either. But uh, you know,
Well, yeah. That's not a bad point actually, Omar. So, uh, like, what would that have meant to you if Newey had gone to Ferrari, and what do you think the outcome
so
would have been?
I think as a Ferrari fan, right, I'm always looking for wins, and I think we win when it comes to transaction days, right? Anytime there's a transaction, we have won that. We If there was a world championship based on or constructors championship based on winning the off season, we would be number one, hands down. Ain't no Red Bull getting anywhere close to us. Okay, it is not happening. But yeah, I don't know. I think I mean, we've talked previously about how Ferrari structured when we talked about the Freddie Vasseur news and Mattia's news there. But I think it's fascinating to see what Red Bull have done from a structural standpoint with Adrian Newey at the helm and the way they've designed that team, right? That really allows them to maximize not just the car and the way it's performed, but it seems like they're able to eke out something new. And I'd be shocked personally if they wouldn't take a step forward with their car, right? Even
Yeah,
with the less wind tunnel time, I think they're so well set up to handle what comes their way, that I think that's interesting to talk about. What do you think?
yeah. Yeah. I think the first thing to talk about is Adrian Newey. So why is he so special? Why is it that if you look back at the 90s, that entire decade was just a 10-year period of Newey cars dominating the track from 92 onwards. But why is he so good, and why is he so relevant right now? Why is it that the guy that has been in Formula One for 40 odd years is now is still producing a dominant championship winning car year on year on year? And I think it comes back to the fact that Newey's unique in Formula One now. Like he's the last of a almost extinct breed of um, technical directors or chief designers. Chief designer, I think, is probably the most accurate way to describe him, because what Newey brings is not necessarily a dictatorial, this is how I need you to do things. It's the fact that he brings experience from such a wide variety of specialisms within Formula One, something that a jack of all trades, but actually an expert in all of those trades that nobody else has got in F1 at the moment. And what I mean by that is, if you if you listen to what he says, so he did a an episode of F1 Beyond the Grid not long ago, and this is also in his book, that
Mhm.
he describes that the Formula One cars design is divided into three main things, right? You've got the aero, you've got the mechanical platform, and then you've got dynamics, and he talks about race engineering within that. And he's had a hand, he's been an expert in all
Mhm.
of those things. Like he's worked in departments and walked across the Chinese glass walls between each of those departments and has been able to have an impact. Um, a good example is over this season, or the 2022 season, he made a point of saying that we're coming into a ground effects era, and he personally went off and designed the front and rear suspension on the um, RB18 because he recognized from when he was, you know, a junior partner at Fittipaldi back in the 70s that actually having having a strong aero package in a ground effect era is one thing, but being able to control that is something completely different. And he knew that having a good mechanical setup was the key to unlocking the potential of these cars, and that's what he went off and designed. But but you couldn't see somebody like James Allison, who number one hasn't lived through a ground effects era, hasn't worked in that ground effects era, and second is purely an aerodynamicist. Really, that's where his specialism lies. How can you expect somebody like that to be able to immediately recognize that that's where the money is. That's how you're going to get potential out of this car. And it's really tricky both for Red Bull going forwards for when Adrian Newey finally retires, but also for how other teams compete with Red Bull right now because Red Bull have completely revolve their structure around him and how to get the absolute most out of Adrian Newey. And that's probably something we can talk about, especially with regards to how he was courted by Ferrari during his early Red Bull days. Because it's one thing having somebody like Adrian Newey, it's something else being able to actually harness that and make it effective. Um, but how do other teams get the same breadth and cohesiveness of knowledge and bring that to bear on the design of their car when they don't have a person like Adrian Newey that is able to, in one person, combine all of the things that you need to be able to create a successful Formula One car. Because the other thing about this is that right now, that's not how Formula One teams are recruiting. And it's not how people are coming into Formula One teams. It's not that somebody comes in having years and years of experience across the board. They come in having done an aero degree or a mechanical engineering degree, or they've come through the race engineering department. That's how Ayu Komatsu has come up through Haas, right? And how do you then make it make a situation or create a situation at your own team where even though you've got different individuals that are specialists in each of these things, how do you bring that together to make sure that the car ultimately is able to bring all those things together without having one mind that is able to do that combination and compute it all for you?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating, right? I think the one thing that sticks out to me in everything you've said is this all goes back to team structure and strategy and vision, right? So Red Bull have had this almost, and it's slightly unfair to say it this way because it doesn't necessarily imply that other teams are not singularly focused on winning. I mean, after all, that's all the sport is about, really, at least for the top four teams, right? But it's in the way that Red Bull have gone about this, right? They have really created that environment for Newey to go ahead and really maximize his skills. So that's one element of it. And I think in many ways, 2021, given how competitive that season was, You kind of didn't see Red Bull coming into 22 with that kind of car. I mean, you could have almost given them a bit of a pass, if you will, to say, hey, look, you were competing until the very end. But in reality, like you said, Newey going away, him having that wealth of experience had already given them an advantage and a jump start on 2022. I mean, I think someday it'd be fascinating to know where the 2022, the RB18 car, right, was conceptualized. When was that actual time? Like, I have to imagine that in Newey's mind, it had probably already been ready the second those regulations had come out. Which
Yeah.
leads me to the second point, which I think is, Newey is one of one, right? He's a bit of a unicorn, right? And that I don't know that you have anyone else on the grid now that has that kind of experience. I mean, as you said, he's part of an almost extinct breed of folks that put their hands in everything. With the way businesses operate, and particularly Formula One teams operate now, right? They operate in a more business siloed like structure where cross training is probably not being done in the same way that it used to be. Part of it is the access to information across the board, right? The technology allows you to dive into different areas without having that depth and knowledge. So I imagine that. I mean, one of my thoughts really with this is just one of those odd timing kind of things, right? Where you're at the right place at the right time with the right person. Then and I feel like on some level, Red Bull have struck gold in that they have someone in him that could, see more than one aspects of the car and the competition across the board and be able to kind of put it all together. Um, I don't know. Again, thinking about the Ferrari thing, right? We're joking about it, right? I don't know that he would have been that successful too, right? Because it is a partnership after all, right? And Ferrari doesn't think I don't think there's anything common between them and Red Bull in terms of the way they go about running that business, right? So, well, look, that's their formula for success has been different too, right? So, I think so. I think that is a fascinating thing, and it also sort of
I,
brings up, yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, I mean, I think the Ferrari thing is really interesting because um, they're not the only ones that are guilty of this. But I agree with you that I think Adrian Newey turning up at Ferrari and having to fit into a structure that's already there, where sometimes you feel like Ferrari would have signed him as a marquee signing as opposed to because they actually knew how to get the best out of him.
Right.
And he would then be stuck in an office in Maranello trying to get these disparate departments to work together. And he does talk in his book about
Hmm.
um, early on in his F1 career, I don't remember which team he was at, but he talked about having the equivalent of a writer's block because he was just in a environment where he was having to work on so many different things, but have people and concentrate on just making the structure work that it used up all his creativity. He didn't have the space to come up with more ideas for the
Right.
car.
Right.
And that sounds like a crime. Like how can you have somebody like Adrian Newey with all of the creativity that he brings and all of the ideas and the cohesion that he has in his thinking, and then not use that, squander it by having a poor team structure. And he already went through that when he was at McLaren, right? That he in the early noughties, um, there was a conversation with Ron Dennis, and maybe Ron Dennis was future planning at this point.
Mhm.
But he was talking about Adrian Newey potentially having shares in McLaren, and as a succession planning that he would partly own the team alongside sort of Martin Whitmarsh and himself. But but when it came down to it, Ron wasn't willing to give him the freedom that he wanted, and ultimately change the structure of the team. This was something that I think Martin Whitmarsh brought in, where they called it the matrix system, right? Where there was the way the whole team was set up. There was no one person that was making all the decisions, so it was all kind of done by committee. Newey calls them the mullahs of McLaren, and he got stifled. He got stifled, and the key example he brings up is that in 2003 they had a car that at the beginning of the season he'd made a mistake on. He recognized that mistake, had asked for a change of chassis, and because everything was now done by committee, he was voted down, and they didn't get that change of chassis, and he ended up having to bring that car, the concepts from that car, 2 years down the line, which resulted in the 2005 car, which was the probably the class of the field that year. Um, and I worry that if he went to Ferrari, that's what would happen. I think he thought the same thing as well. That the part of the reason that he turned down Ferrari was because he was worried that one, he'd be stuck in a system that he didn't like, and second, that he'd be doing the same thing he'd done at Williams and the same thing that he did at McLaren, which was he'd fall into a system that was already there. He's not building something new. And Red Bull gave him a chance to build something from scratch. And they gave him the freedom to kind of say, okay, Adrian, how do you want to run this? And then he designed everything from there. And as soon as they had a regulation change in 2009, that had an impact like that. It proved that what they were doing, what Red Bull had done in signing him, was absolutely the right thing to do, and they've kept that structure and evolved it to allow him to form the department in his own image, but also allowed him to step back a little bit. Now he still has input, as I said, with the suspension of the 2022 car. He still has input, but he's able to take a bit more of a back seat and just be the guy that's sort of whispering ideas in, as opposed to the guy that's leading everything from the front. And I think that's exactly what he wants. And I can't see him wanting to move away from that. I think that the other Formula One teams are going to have to come up with a creative way of replicating that, of having that one mind shared between a number of people and being able to still be cohesive. That is the challenge. And I don't know what you think about the way that Red Bull's rivals have come up with to do that.
I think that what this is where McLaren is interesting, right? Because they it seems like they're building the sort of committee to get at him, right? It's at least on paper, right? It seems like they're bringing in two or three guys that will have the knowledge that Adrian Newey has and kind of put it together. At the end of the day, this is such an interpersonal business, right? If you have the right personalities in the right setup, in the right environment at the right time, and you allow them to, cook, right? And they can all get together, they can get along, then that'll work, right? So I think you're right. I think
Yeah.
it's fair to cast questions over what the future of Red Bull might look like once he does eventually depart, which doesn't feel like anytime soon, but it might be sooner, right? And I think I think this is where the Ferrari example is also very interesting, right? Because Ferrari have a history and a legacy that's built on a lot of what Red Bull is only now accomplishing, right? So there's something to be said about an upstart team that is hungry and fully focused on dominating the sport and not just winning, but winning in a way that really sets a message, right? And being there consistently, right? So they probably more so than maybe at any other time in their history, right? In their young history, felt like this is what they would value. But who's to say that 10 years from now, 15 years from now, when Red Bull have, dominated, looks like at least they're going to dominate, most of this decade, right? It's fair to assume in some way, shape, or form that where would that look like? Would they have the same patience and the same desire, right? Because, it's easy to look at Adrian's success now and look at it in that sort of positive light. But what if he had gotten it wrong, right? And I think that's kind of what you've seen at Ferrari too, right? Mattia did kind of get it wrong with the car, right? And yeah, maybe we can, I mean, look at what they're going to do in 24 now with, Project 676, right? We'll see what that looks like. But I think the reality also is that it takes leadership at the top, right? You almost have to give as much credit to all the people that are up above to say, okay, it does take time. And we've seen this in other sports, right? Where, I follow a lot of NFL and basketball, right? And there are losing seasons where you can imagine, the owner going, okay, this is it. we're done, we're going to move in a different direction, and then that takes on a new cycle of its own. On the flip side, that tipping point between failure and success is just that much more patience in some ways, and it did work out in this case. And of course, the regulations helped, right? Like we went into a ground effect era, right? Had that not been the case, who knows, right? I'm not suggesting that Newey wouldn't have been competitive, but this is what I mean by ground effect is something Newey knows from his days. I mean, he's written about the fact that is something he paid a lot of attention to at one point in his career, and I don't know anyone else that knows ground effect nearly as much as he does, right? Just as a
I
concept.
think 2 points there, right? The first is that like Newey rarely misses. Like even then, even when the rules changed in 2014 to bring in the turbo hybrids, the main reason Red Bull didn't compete in those seasons was because they didn't have an
They
engine,
didn't have the engine, correct? Yes,
right? So
yes.
that you can't necessarily put that on Adrian Newey. And as soon as we had the ground effect era and they had an engine that was capable, actually, even in 2021, they had an engine that was on par. Yes, there was an aerodynamic penalty that was paid by Mercedes, but actually Red Bull with the team with the aero concept to be able to take advantage of that. They were right there. Nobody else was close to Mercedes, really. And historically, he's been the one that's been able to nail the regulation changes. You look back at the active suspension era at the beginning of the 90s, he was the one that was able to harness that
Yep.
properly with an aero package and engine mapping and exhaust blow and diffusers. They came in 1992. That was there on the FW14B. And then the narrow base cars in 98 nailed it. 2009 nailed it. 2022 nailed it. Every single time there's a big regulation change, it's because of the way he looks at it, right? And he talks about this all the time, that he's not looking at, okay, what is the intention of the rule change?
Mhm.
He looks at the rule book and goes, okay, where are the loopholes? What is it?
Mhm.
What is the exact wording of this regulation? How can I use that to my advantage? But I think what you said about about leading from the top, that's really fundamental. Like none of this works if you have a corporate layer that is meddling in all of this. And that is always my worry with Ferrari. It's been my worry about Alpine since they've had all of the changes that they've had there. There's no point having a genius in your technical department if the men and women in corporate are constantly trying to interfere and make decisions and don't understand the timeline that you so eloquently described there. If you don't give that structure the time to do their thing, or you don't, I don't like the way that rear wing looks because it's not the same as that other team down the pit lane. Like that's not your department. Get out of there. Just let the people do their thing. That I still think that was at least partly what killed Mattia Binotto's tenure at Ferrari. That there was just too much. There's too much interference from the top. They wouldn't let him do his job. And I think Adrian Newey in that scenario, in that environment of Ferrari, the same thing would have happened to him. So that's just a fundamental. I think Ferrari definitely need to have got on top of that before they're going to be able to mount serious challenges. So I think of the remaining teams that have a structure that allow them to let their technical departments do their thing independently, McLaren and Mercedes are probably best placed because Zach Brown at McLaren clearly realizes that I'm happy to put the people there that I think are going to do this job,
Right.
but it's not my job,
It's
right?
not my
I
job. Yeah.
I, I don't do that. So
Yeah.
there's no point in me saying you're moving down the wrong track, you're doing the wrong thing. And he's made some really smart hires. I thought Andres Seidel was brilliant. And he went as far as saying that, okay, look, I'm running the team, but Andres, you're running the actual race team. So hiring and firing is actually down to you. So Andres Seidel was who got James Key in, which I mean, I've got thoughts about that, but that's different. That's different. And when Seidel left, they brought in Andres Stella. Stella for me is a very, very impressive individual, right? Really impressive. He's come through again, a race engineering background. He race engineered Fernando for years and years at Ferrari.
Oh,
Followed him over in 2015 to McLaren, and is now team principal of McLaren. I mean, that's mental, isn't it? But he strikes me as a guy that has always had a couple loaded in the chamber, right? He's always had an idea of in this era of Formula One, with everything that he's seen and all the success he's seen at Ferrari, because he was there in the early years as well, right? You know, he has a clear idea of what he thinks is the best way to challenge. Um, and now he's done that. McLaren also are very transparent in the way that they've structured things. They've been quite clear about like this is how we're structured our technical department. And Stella has had the free reign to do that, right? And he's done exactly what you talked about. He's tried to get people from the absolute specialists in the area to be heads of department. He's got an aero department. He's got a engineering and design department, and he's got a concept and forward planning department. And he's put three exceptional people. He's got Peter Prodromou as head of aero, who was at McLaren with Newey before. He was at Red Bull with Newey in the success years, and then moved back to McLaren again. So, like, I think he's beyond the pale. He just hasn't had a structure to be able to really unleash his talents. And then you've got Rob Marshall, who's just come along from Red Bull. You can't have the experience and the knowledge that brings. And then he's brought David Sanchez along from Ferrari as well. So those are your three technical heads. And they're the ones that are going to take all of the information that's come from lower down, all the data that's been crunched and analyzed, and they then form that into a plan for what they think is good for the car, and then they talk to each other and they bring all of that together. If you're going to have a hive mind, that sounds like a very sound way of doing it. Creating the Adrian Newey mind between three people effectively.
And yet I think it's a very flimsy arrangement, right? What if Zach Brown leaves a year from now? What if Andrea Stella moves on to somewhere else, right? So yes, I do agree with you. I think that this is really at the cutting edge of success, right? As much as the on-track stuff is, right, at the cutting edge of success, right? This is literally where it happens, right? And I think that's why we, in part, I think it's fair to assume that McLaren has the best chance of giving Red Bull a run for their money, at least earlier on in the season, right? Because they are really going to be able to build upon what they already did the half of last year, the second half of last year, right? And then the added knowledge that Rob Marshall would bring in, and also with David Sanchez, I think is really going to help them right from the get-go.
Yeah, and Ahmad, that's really impressive, right? Because for the longest time, McLaren have been sitting there going, "Look, we're going to come good once we have our wind tunnel on stream. We're going to come good when we have our new driver in loop simulator." It was always success deferred a year or two down the line, after this big thing happened, where Stella seems to have thrown that in the bin and said, look, it doesn't matter. We've got a structure. We need to be doing well now. And that's what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
that's why I've always had some reservations about James Key and his ability to work in a big team, in a front running team. He's a good technical director, but I think that he doesn't have the vision that somebody like Stella does. And Stella's had the vision to bring all this together and has brought that structure to bear early on in his tenure, and it's had results quickly at McLaren in the second half of last season. Which, without the help of a brand spanking new wind tunnel, I think that's really impressive and ominous for other teams going forwards.
On top of everything that we just talked about McLaren, what is the other formula, the magic potion that will really help them get to success, which is that they have not had success in a long, long time, right?
Yeah, they're hungry.
2008,
They are hungry.
right? They're
Yeah,
hungry.
they're hungry.
They're hungry in a way. So that combination of hunger, structure, car, driver, you can see why they would their best position to kind of do that, right? I mean, you can almost rule out Ferrari because of all the anomalies and the randomness that comes with it. Maybe they figure it out, maybe they don't. Mercedes, we don't know because the car seems like, it's going to be a brand new car. So again, it does seem like a bit of a random factor. But McLaren has a lot of these things lined up and no other obvious sort of competitor, in their chase of Red Bull, right? They're Aston Martin, maybe, who knows? But really, they have all the pieces together for a good 24.
I think Aston and Mercedes are both. I agree. They're the big unknowns. We can talk about Aston quickly. Like Aston have got a technical director that clearly knows what he's doing. Is held in high regard at the team that he just came from. Red Bull didn't want him to go.
Mm-hmm.
He was the right hand man to Adrian Newey at Red Bull during his time there. But again, this comes down to structure. He had a big impact immediately, but the fact that they fell off so precipitously towards the end of the season. Now, how much of that is because Dan Fallows himself didn't have the ideas or the creativity to make that a sustained success, and how much of it is actually because the structure at Aston Martin is still not quite ready to harness what he can bring, right? Because I think that for me is what happened at Mercedes. That in 2022, when the new car was designed, I know that James Allison had something to do with it at the start, but actually the bulk of the heavy lifting was done by Mike Elliott and his team in 2022 and in 2021 and into 2022. And the way that it's described, again, this is coming from a very candid interview that Allison did. And if anyone wants to find it, if you look for his interview on the Performance People podcast, he talks about the fact that when he came back, when he was asked to come back and take a more active role, what he found was that all of the different departments, they have all this data, all this information in front of them. And the job of a Formula One team, the structure of all of this is to be able to use that data and interpret it correctly, and to then come up with the right ideas, solutions based on that information. And in 2022, what James Allison found when he came back and saw what was going on was that all of the different departments were really desperate to get back to the front, and they were taking all this information and they were coming up with ideas, but it was all in a silo, and there was no regular review of what that information meant and sharing with the other departments to try and bring that together and to stop each department from going down a rabbit hole that actually it may in that individual specialism have been impressive. But actually, when you brought everything together, you'd find that actually those two things didn't. It was a dead end. The zero pod idea seems like a case in point of that. That the aero department went down this rabbit hole and said we've got all of this massive downforce that we can generate, but the mechanical department weren't involved in that conversation, and therefore, when that concept was put on them, they have to sit back and say, well, okay, you need this to work at a really low ride height. We can't give you the suspension to do that, because maybe they could have done that, but they weren't necessarily involved early enough to be able to say, look, you need to compromise your aero development, your aero ideas, because the mechanical platform won't allow you to do that. That's what Adrian Newey was able to do at Red Bull, because he was able to take that. Yes, there is massive potential for aero here, but actually you need the mechanical platform to be able to harness that. And he said early on that this is the restriction, and actually the Red Bull maybe doesn't have the the ultimate peak downforce that the other cars have the potential for, but it's able to harness effectively what it does have because it has a mechanical platform that allows it to do that. Okay, fine, technicality, right? And it's a sort of technical nuance, but the fact that Mercedes weren't able to do that speaks to the fact that there was one department that were just super excited and just went down their own route and didn't talk to anybody else. And that, I think, is what James Allison says that he's started to bring now. And you could see it in 2023 as well with, I mean, the problem with the Mercedes often is that it's a lot of talk and then you see potential results further down the line. So, but what they were saying sounded like it was a good idea, that they're bringing everyone together for regular reviews to talk about where everybody is. That you can see where the potential is and see where you can continue to go down a rabbit hole and where actually someone needs to be reined back to say, well, actually, yeah, that might work for you, but for us, it brings this disadvantage. So can you think about it in a different way? If they've done that effectively and they've created that hive mind that McLaren seem to have got right so far, then potentially Mercedes will be a force again. I think what this all speaks to, Amar, is that it's not about copying a car that a rival has. It's not about copying a rear wing or copying a diffuser. That's part of it. Yes, looking at other people's ideas and seeing how they fit with yours is fine. But that's not how you're going to win in F1. I think it starts much more fundamentally than that. And if you want to succeed in F1, actually, maybe you need to copy somebody else's team structure, and that's how you're going to win.
So you're telling me that the millions of dollars I spent trying to grab photos of Checo Perez's Red Bull from Monaco are no good? Like, is that what you're trying to say? Like, this is our take, Shez. This is our take. It don't matter what the car is, right? Go take a picture of their team standing together and then copy that structure, right? That's what we want to do.
But also go on their LinkedIn page
Go on their LinkedIn page
to find out exactly what everybody's job description is.
So they're not doing this right. So if you're a Formula One team listening to us, just go look at the organizational structure, the hierarchy of your team. Actually, go over to Red Bulls, find a way to hack into their system. I didn't say that. Find a way to get to know what they're doing and do that. But no, I do agree with you. I think, it's so funny, right? When teams are successful, right? We give the credit to a driver or a team principal, or in this case, Adrian Newey. But it really is the sum total of all its parts, right? Like, and it's putting the right pieces together, creating the right environment, creating the right structure, the right lines of communication, revisiting them over and over again. And I also think, again, a lot of this is a factor of what happens when you get success, which is what intrigues me about Red Bull coming into this year, right? Because they have had a year unlike any other. And if we know one thing about human tendency, complacency is almost certain to follow. And that is the intriguing factor for me coming into this season, is where, if at all, do we see Red Bull kind of show some cracks in how they're doing things, right? Whether it's in the development of the car, we all expect it to move forward, but who knows where that could go, right? We expect them to perform well on race day, which they have, but last year they didn't really get challenged in any way. So we don't know a lot about what we don't know a lot about, right? And so, yeah, I think and one more thing, reliability, right? I mean, you talked about how unreliable their engines were, right? A few years ago, but they've had reliability unlike any other over the course of the last 2 years. I mean, even if we go back to those first couple of races in Melbourne, that really was an engine failure. I mean, there was one race where they couldn't really figure out a very sort of, simple thing, right? It really wasn't an engine blowing out like Ferraris did in
but they have double retirements, right?
Yeah,
yes,
fair enough.
But I think Red Bull, and this goes back to an earlier conversation, right? Red Bull in their down years, when they weren't winning everything, were honing all of the things that they had control over.
Sure.
So they couldn't necessarily control the how far Mercedes were getting in terms of those regulations, in terms of air and how they could harness their power unit, but they were able to have the quickest pit stops. They were able to absolutely nail strategy because they had to, because when the slightest opportunity presented itself, they had to be able to take it. And they've kept that going. So even
Yeah,
when they're dominant, they don't let those things slip.
they
So
don't.
other than McLaren, they have the fastest pit stops. And their strategy means that even if Max starts 23rd, that's not even on the grid. That's in another postcode. He's still got a chance of at least finishing on the podium, if not winning the race. There's no situation in which to the point where he could win in Abu Dhabi with a less than ideal strategy, but but do it in a way that allowed him to have the most number of laps led in a season. I mean, it's crazy. That's the level of strategy that they have, and they've built that up over their fallow seasons. It's but I was going to say something else and I've forgotten. But that's where the foundation of their success, I think, is built.
I agree. I don't. I would just love to see all of this be tested, right? And it be tested in a way like it's not been before. So I am secretly hoping that McLaren will be able to give them a, some run for their money in some ways, and magically Ferrari will figure out something somewhere, maybe an extra 20 kph in that engine that I'm looking to see happen now. Since 2 years I've been listening about it, like get that engine made already. And I know they can't really do that anymore, but who knows? But I think again, once you push them right in ways that they have not been pushed before, I think it'd be fantastic to see, because ultimately this is a people business, right? And it's success is always hard to maintain. But I have no doubt that they will do it this year. I have no doubt, and we can't walk into the season
Yeah,
thinking that there would be any
yeah,
other result outside of that.
yeah. I mean, I absolutely agree that they're the favourites. But there are unknowns out there, right? But we don't know how successful the other teams have been
Yeah, yeah,
in creating their new
right,
concepts.
right.
McLaren, I think, are probably the best known out of that because we saw what they did at the end of last season.
Yeah.
Aston and Mercedes, frankly, I don't know. Mercedes enjoy talking a big game. Their game talking is big, and it's
I like what you did there.
um, but whether that translates into actual lap time, I guess I don't know. Time will tell. But listen,
It's
I'm like you. Like I do want to see competition at the front. One thing that I guess stands in our favor is that this will be the third season of these regulations, and Zach Brown I think was worried that Red Bull have had such a head start on the 2024 regulations because on their 2024 car because they've not really had to develop their 2023 car. They've been so far ahead, they've not needed to do anything. So they've got loads of tokens to spend on the 24 car. But the contra argument to that is what James Allison says is there potentially a glass ceiling to that concept? And is there actually potentially a lower ceiling to these ground effect cars than there was in the previous generation of cars? So will Red Bull run into the law of diminishing returns earlier than they would have in previous rule cycles? If that's the case, then game on.
the the
We'll
other
we'll have closer racing straight away.
And that might be the only hope too, right? I mean, Red Bull are also good at handling the PR stuff of this, right? So they might have already hit that ceiling. We just don't even know, and they would never tell us that too. So yeah,
Yeah.
I love concluding a talk on a more optimistic note, right? Because at the end of the day, that's what we want. We want a little more competition, right? So there we go.
Yeah.
But hey, crown him right now. Like Newey should be walking around the grid with a crown, in my opinion. Like that, there should be like a
Uh,
crown design for someone like him. Be like, that's what he got. Just like Max
Team
has his
new.
golden helmet, right? That's kind of what he needs.
I mean, I'm all right. I think it already is. I think when he retires, 1992 to whenever
It's
he
crazy.
decides to hang up his drawing board, will be remembered as the era of Newey,
Yeah.
right?
Oh
It,
no,
it, it will
indeed.
be. He's just had such a massive impact on the way that Formula One works. Like the entire structure of the cars up until 2022 was based on his design, and he's doing it again now. You know, you cannot understate that level of impact.
It's genius.
And the amazing thing about it is that there will never be another, because the way that F1 is structured and the way that people are coming through doesn't allow for that, which is
This
scary, isn't it?
incomparably, this is sort of the final chapter on beings like him, right? And I think
I agree.
again, we'll probably have AI doing a lot of this stuff, and poorly, I might add, but that's probably where it's going.
Well, if they could download Adrian Newey
There we
into an
go.
AI,
There we go.
yeah, yeah, there you go.
That's what
That's a
Ferrari
brilliant.
needs. That's what they need. They need so they
Okay,
can go
if anyone's thought of it, Red Bull will have
Red
already
Bull
thought about
probably
it.
have, right? Are
Yeah,
they secretly placing a chip in his head that sort of
yeah.
copies everything.
Yeah, exactly. This is the DEFCON 3
Yeah.
status for Red Bull. If anything happens to Newey, it got downloaded.
All of this we should
Um,
let everyone know is completely reckless speculation, right? Like this is this- hey, who knows? Hey, exactly. But we should have a sounder for our reckless speculation portion. Like there's something that lets
yeah,
people know.
yeah, yeah. Keep it
Yeah,
real. Okay, so should we talk about something else?
let's do it.
We've had some news this week, and look, we'll come and talk about all of the different things that have happened over the past week or two, over the coming weeks, just to give each topic its fair time. But one of the main things that's happened this week was that Madrid has been given a contract from 2026, and a 10-year deal at that. And what they've created is a hybrid street track with a purpose-built section that incorporates a banked loop a la Zandvoort, a la the Dunlop curve at the Nürburgring. And it's probably fair to say, Amara, that the reaction to that on social media has been less than ecstatic. And some of the arguments that have been voiced are, number one, that we have too many street tracks, that we seem to be in an era where F1 are prioritizing destination Grand Prix, bring the race to the people as opposed to the people to the race. And the second is that it also spells some kind of jeopardy for established tracks. So the Circuit de Catalunya is the one that is potentially under threat. Those are the arguments. Those are the things that have been voiced. What's your take?
Well, on a personal level, I am a little bit bummed because I keep having to revise my bucket list of visiting all tracks in an F1 calendar year. So, but look, I don't get the outrage. Like this is crazy, man. Yeah, the sport is going through an iteration change. I mean, we just got done talking about how Ferrari has not evolved into being a 21st century type of organizational structure. And on the other hand, we're going to have all this outrage about Formula One trying to do new things, right? So I don't get the outrage. I can see why. And by the way, I am a purist, just like most of our Formula One friends are in this area. And if you're a person new to the sport, you don't really care one way or another. I did love Barcelona, though. I did sort of have it on my list, so that one
Did
hurts.
you?
I did.
Oh,
And then I have it in my top five actually. So I just well, first of all, I love being there, right? So like I think it's such a great city. But by the way, Madrid is is no second place to Barcelona in any way. So I think that's fair. I love that, and we've talked about this previously with sprint races and whatnot, but I do love the fact that we're trying to go to different places. Liberty Media, by the way, wants each of these races to be like a Super Bowl. If you haven't been to a Super Bowl or if you haven't experienced it, it is a week-long celebration of the sport that culminates with this one game that awards a champion, right? And there is a thing called Media Row that basically has a bunch of media people lined up outside the stadium a week before this starts. There are celebrities that come in and come out. There's all kinds of festivities happening. And I think that's the model that Liberty Media wants to apply here. So I think there are two main things that are coming out of this. One, of course, they want to look for destination cities, right? A la Las Vegas, right? You also have Jeddah, which in a weird way is also a street circuit, but also affords the ability for people to access circuits and interact with it in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. You and I have been to Austin. Austin is a great city, but the circuit is further away from the main city, right? Whereas if you go to Madrid, you're going to be in the heart of the city. Even the Miami circuit, which is slightly away from the heart of Miami, is still sort of within the city. So I can see why they're going for that vibe, right? They want people to have more access to it. They want more eyeballs, right? So when you land in each of these airports, you can see it right out of the gate, but you can also see it on the highways and streets that lead up to the circuit. It sort of is part of the ecosystem of what each of these cities have to offer. The other thing is, which I think is probably the more critical thing to talk about, right? Which is what happens to some of these purpose-built iconic circuits, right? This talk about Monza being challenged by Milan. This talk about Suzuka possibly being replaced by Osaka, right? There's similar talks about what Spa was, and I know that's sort of been put to rest here for a little bit, but that did come up a couple years ago. And I think what they're trying to do, at least Formula One in its current iteration and the leadership there, are trying to send a message to these other tracks that say, "Hey, you got to step up your game." I mean, it's the same thing for Monaco, right? Like I know there's been concerns about the fan experience and sort of being there, which by the way is top on my list of places to go in my F1 bucket list. But I can see why, as they try to bring in new eyeballs into the sport, that they want it to be in destinations that really afford more than just track action. So I'm not upset at it entirely, but I can also see why people are outraged, right? Like that is understandable. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think there has to be a there has to be a recognition that Formula One isn't just about the TV audience. It's not just about us watching cars go around amazing corners. There has to be some service given to the people that actually stump up the cash and turn up to a track. And I think you're 100% right that F1 seem to be doing a slight Bernie move, where they kind of put pressure on established current circuits, and say, well, if you're not willing to up your game, we've got this guy, so to sort it out. And you know, in the case of Monza and Spa, that's absolutely happened, hasn't it? That Monza is in the process of massively upgrading its infrastructure and making it a more pleasant experience for fans. Spa has already done that. These places are still difficult to get to comparatively, but at least when you get there, the experience is great. I mean, we went to the Circuit of the Americas a couple of seasons ago, and for me, the fan experience was great. It was a fun little festival atmosphere, but everything that you needed was there. You had good access to places to go, to spots to go and see the track. There's plenty of track action. There's if you wanted to get something to eat, there were plenty of places to go get something to eat. You go and compare that to the reports coming out of Barcelona for the last couple of seasons. They didn't have enough toilets, they didn't have enough food, didn't have enough water. These are just the basics. If you can't get that right, then obviously F1's going to come and say, well, maybe you shouldn't have a Grand Prix. They're charging a lot of money for tickets. They're sold out months and months in advance. So to not have the basic infrastructure there is inexcusable. So yes, I absolutely get the outrage. I absolutely understand that. But if your established tracks are not gonna do the business, then they're gonna get replaced. But F1 are also showing that if you do up your game, that if you do invest in yourself and make things better for fans, that they'll keep you on. Zandvoort, Monza, Spa, Silverstone, all cases in point. And I think sometimes as a TV audience, we don't necessarily recognize that, because the experience of going to a track is not just about sitting in your seat and watching the race. It's also about just the fundamentals of enjoying your experience there.
Yeah, and I can see why, again, for someone that does not follow the sport and is not as entrenched in it as much as we are, why the need for side attractions is massive, right? I remember working at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway back in '05, '06, '07, '05 and '06. I remember that very infamous race with only six cars running happening too, right? And I remember not having a whole lot to do outside of the circuit, right? But as a new fan, someone that does not really engage in watching, practice one, practice two, practice three, and some of the other support races, right? That we generally don't watch if you are just tuning into race day action. I can see why Formula One wants to make that value proposition for other folks to get anything. I mean, when we were at the Circuit of the Americas, they have so much happening outside of just the races that you can spend the whole day there, maybe not even catch a practice session, right? And just have enough to do there too. So the whole
Yeah,
idea is that if you're trying to bring in new audiences in there, that you find a way for them to have attraction. And let's be honest, right? We live in a day and age where our attention span on anything is less than 8 seconds, right? And we want to have a great access to Wi-Fi when we're even, in the stadium and these circuits and tracks, and we want to be able to connect on social media, and we want to be able to do a lot of different things. And I think that just sort of adds to the whole thing too, right? And I too had read about those reports about not having enough facilities at Barcelona. I was just prepared to kind of, tough it out, man. That was my thing. But I mean, I guess I thankfully won't have to
it
do
shouldn't
that
be.
anymore, though.
Well, but it shouldn't be an ordeal, right? It shouldn't
It
be.
shouldn't be
It
an
shouldn't be
ordeal.
like
Yeah, yeah,
like
it
putting
should.
yourself through the ringer just just to watch a race. It's
Yeah.
not meant to be.
Well, and I think though the Formula One genuinely has, right. I mean, we've talked about TV and broadcasting and all that, but I think your point is so right about like having circuits that really make it attractive to everyone and have. I mean, yeah, it should go without saying that fundamental services are what they are, right? You should be able to have those facilities. But I also think I mean, they're purposefully going at destinations that people would love to go. I mean, who wouldn't want to go spend a weekend in Las Vegas? Who wouldn't want to go spend a weekend in Miami? Who wouldn't want to go and spend a weekend in Madrid? Who wouldn't want to go to Singapore, right? Like, who wouldn't want to go to
Yeah,
these
100%.
destinations as a whole? So I think it also gives people from the very get-go a chance to build a sort of a
Yeah.
vacation around it too. And I think that's a fascinating thing about it. I just hope that, for example, we have Kyle Lamy come back, right? Like that's
Oh, yeah.
would love to have
Yeah.
circuits like that, right?
Yeah.
From a
Oh,
fan
yeah. Yeah.
perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
So that I think is something that that we should all be able to get behind, right? That going to another continent, making this a true world championship, is it has to be fundamental to the plan that Liberty Media have going forwards. And South Africa are lucky in that they have a purpose-built track already.
correct.
The last I heard, I'm not entirely sure that it's quite up to the FIA Grand Prix standard yet, but that's something that the FIA or F1, if you're going to invest in something, they put so much money into Vegas and promoting that themselves. Doing the same for Kyle Army, I think would be incredible. You don't have to build the facility; it's already there.
Yeah.
It's got an established name. You don't have to market something that isn't familiar to Formula One teams already or Formula One fans already. Um, so that for me seems like a no-brainer. If you're going to put some money in to promote a race yourselves as the promoter, that's the one to do. And you know, I personally would love it, and I think most people would be really, really excited to have a race in Africa. Just one thing that I wanted to say was that, look, if you're going to bring a new track, if you're going to bring a new event to the calendar, it's much cheaper to bring it to a street track than it is to build a completely new facility. Like, it took how many years for Kota to come online? They had to get the funding. Then even after that, it was a little bit on the rocks because
Yep.
the race promoter wasn't necessarily making the ticket sales back, and then it puts that race at risk again, and then all of that investment is at risk, and that's a risk that Formula One don't have to take. It's the race promoters that have to take that risk. So why would they put loads of money into this racetrack that could become a white elephant when actually it's cheaper to just go, all right, we'll do a street track and not have to create this micro environment around a place in the middle of nowhere. I get that. It's not what I want. I'd much rather see more quotas. But the only countries I think that at the moment have the money and the inclination to say, look, if this doesn't work out and this racetrack is only used once a year, it doesn't really matter, are the countries in the Middle East. And as much as I enjoy Bahrain, and as much as the Jeddah street circuit is a great piece of racing architecture, there's been a backlash against that as well. You have a massive social media outpouring about Formula One being happy to go to countries that use Formula One to sport wash, to coin a term, right? And it seems to be that collectively as F1 fans, we seem to like complaining because it's either there's too many street tracks, well, it's cheap, that's what you're going to have, or we don't want to go to countries that have bad human rights reputations. And just full disclosure, I don't either. Like I don't want to be associated with a sport that makes it okay for human rights abuses to happen. Fundamentally, but that's not what I want. And I'm not casting aspersions anywhere. That's just a fundamental belief. But you can't then say that I want purpose-built tracks, and then when the countries that have the wherewithal to do it provide those purpose-built tracks, say, oh, well, I don't want to go there. It's trying to have your cake and eat it, and I don't think that's viable. You're always going to be disappointed. Partly, I think that F1 fans like to complain. Maybe that's a little harsh. I like to complain too. I do it a lot. I'll do it on this quite a lot too. But this isn't the battleground for me. We talked before about balance, right? We said that there are 7 street tracks on the calendar next year. That still means there's 17 purpose-built tracks. It's not like we're bidding them all off. They're still there. So there's plenty to go round, and I do like a bit of variety. But to say that Formula One are selling out, I think is perhaps a bit of an overstatement. But that's me personally.
That topic, the selling out topic, will fit in right well into another topic we'll get at another time, right? I think there's a lot to, and by the way, there is no harm. I mean, this is how the world works, right? Like most of the companies we use apps and technologies have some kind of money in there that comes from questionable sources, right? So we cannot fail to remember that Liberty Media is a US based company, and in a capitalistic society, like those two things generally will always find tension. There's always going to be that in there. I do agree with you. I do think that at the same time, I think there's something to be said about immortalizing certain circuits, right? Like I know Silverstone would never, well, hopefully would never be at peril in any way, but it did pain me to see Monza being in peril, right? Like, and I know they've stepped up their game, but I think there are certain circuits that should just live in there. I think Abu Dhabi now will sort of live in there. Not that we'll have any doubts about that circuit, being not just at par, but above par in all categories, right? But I think after 2021, like that circuit has to live in there because there's some history made there that stems way beyond the championship too, right? So
yeah.
That's got.
I mean, if we're going to say that, then Suzuka should definitely be immortalized.
Oh no,
too,
I
right?
totally, I feel the same way about Suzuka too, right?
Yeah, me too.
I think that there's, again, I think if you're a purist, you're going to love those circuits too. But at the same time, look, when Singapore came on board, like Singapore is now kind of, you would argue in one of the best circuits. I mean, all the drivers speak so well about that circuit. We've never been. It's our dream. Tired pod in Singapore, maybe in 25 or 26. Let's see. Let's see if we can get behind that. But I think the reality is, I think you have to give folks a chance, right? Even Jeddah produced a great race the first time around, right? Even last year, actually. So there are good races.
So did Vegas, right?
So did
Vegas
Vegas.
was a great race.
Indeed, Vegas was so good. So I'm excited, and I don't know enough technicalities about the Madrid circuit, but it certainly doesn't look like a slow circuit by any means. And look, Baku has been great in so many ways too, right? I mean, in its own right, it's produced some classic races. So we shouldn't be quick to write those off. And I'm with you. I think again, if we got to a point where we had, 15 or 16 out of 24 races just be at street circuits, yeah, maybe that's something to, yeah, sure, that's something to complain about.
Like
but
that. Yeah, I agree. It's about balance, right?
It's about balance, and I think we're also in the midst of a slow off season too, right? That's the other problem right now we have. So I think once it starts, that'll happen. But I'd like to begin a petition to support us getting to Madrid in 26 among Singapore and all that. So Tired Pod will be podcasting live from there if we make it there. Like, let's make that a goal. Huh?
Let's make that a goal.
We'll start a fund for it too.
Oh God, yeah, who's gonna pay for that?
Who's going to pay for that? No one.
So that seems like a good place to end this particular conversation. But we have left a few things on the table, which we will come back to hopefully in the upcoming weeks. So certainly the Red Bull B team rebrand, whatever.
Say the name, Shaz. Say the name. Come on.
Visa, Cash App, RB. Racing.
There we go.
I don't know.
There we go. It only took 2 minutes, didn't it?
God, terrible. Yeah. I mean, if anyone complains about our runtime, that's why. And also the contract extensions for Charles Leclerc and Lando Norris that have come out in the last 48 hours. I think that is definitely something that we will need to sink our teeth into, Amar, in the upcoming week. So stuff for everybody to look forward to. I hope. Obviously, we're still starting this out. This is only volume 3. So like, subscribe. We're on Apple. We're on Spotify. Leave us a 5-star review. And hey, we'll see you in the next one.
See you soon.